There have been so many changes across the board since COVID-19 impacted us really back in March and coming through to the present. And so many companies have made a pivot. But Stanfields in Nova Scotia has made more than just a pivot within themselves. They have actually, in their actions, have indicated a pivot for the entire Canadian supply chain. I'm here today to talk to Jon Stanfield. He is the president and CEO of Stanfields Ltd. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So can you take me back to your business back in March, what you were doing at that point before the pandemic hit?
I was really starting to get concerned about the level of business and a general slowdown in the economy. You could see it inside of our booking numbers. And I'm an avid news guy. So listening to the news, which was 24/7 about the upcoming pandemic and the coronavirus and its impact on Canada and what may or may not happen. And I, over the period of 7 days, got really, really concerned. Public health officials were saying, close, stay home, do nothing. Voices got louder. So I heeded to those voices here in our factory, where we had probably 225 or 250 people here on the day shift. And I just closed the factory.
Right.
A lot of uncertainty around where the economy was going for our general business. No real second plans at this point in time to enter PPE market and what we may or may not be able to do. So my first move was to protect the health and safety, not only of our employees, but our community, to avoid community spread. So I talked with both government officials and public health officials and decided on March 16th that I would close the factory down and lay everybody off before all of these government programs came in place. I felt that our employees would be protected very much in the near future beyond the layoff. And I also felt that if a big rural company like Stanfields were deciding public health first, safety first, that other companies might want to follow. So I was trying to be a little bit of a lead in that factor as well, pre-pandemic. Of course, post-pandemic, there's 150 degree, 360 degree or 700 degree turn that we made to move out of the pandemic very quickly.
So your company is well over 100 years old. You have been in the business of manufacturing clothing and then underwear for the bulk of that time. Has this been the first time you've been forced to close?
Yeah, I think what I recall it would be. I mean, we had tectonic shifts in the past during war times where the factory was completely converted away from its products that it made for the consumer market and only made products for those soldiers who were fighting overseas. So that would probably be considered maybe a partial closure, but there was probably more people here. I could just visualize that amount of people here that were sewing in the war times for our soldiers. But I can't remember, and I can't find anything in the annals that would have said we were shut down because of pandemic.
Right. So I guess as with wartime, when you, I guess, changed from making your standard product to making clothing for soldiers, you made a switch at this point as well, from making your standard foundational products to making personal protective equipment and specifically medical gowns. How did that come about?
Yeah, so on the same day that we announced we were closing the factory, a lot of soul searching, obviously from CEOs and the staff looking upwards to say, okay, Jon, what now? What does this mean to me, to my family, our managers who I kept on all through this process to help support when I found the solution alone. What could Stanfields do to really support frontline workers, but also support the company and help the company create a bridge that would allow us time to move through the next process of consumer behavior coming back online, of purchasing money in people's pockets, all of these types of things. So I said there's two options. One, there's masks and there's gowns. We have the equipment for gowns. We have probably have a reasonable fabric supply chain for gowns once we get into it. And that's where I started. So I told most of my management team that we were going to be making gowns and let's start to get ready for that. And they said, well, when are we going to start? And I said, I don't know. I haven't had a conversation with anybody yet. So I started down the path with both the federal government and the provincial government here in Nova Scotia to say that we will convert our factory to make gowns for the frontline workers. And so those conversations were going on side by side of developing fabrics. So between March 16th and March 23rd, we developed 2 fabrics. The first one was kind of a funny one to start it with a house wrap. And it wasn't like the Tyvek wrap. It was from polymer that was their alternative to Tyvek in the housing market. It was a lighter weight house wrap. And within that fabric, I noticed that they had a really nice lightweight backing on it. I said, if we could take that backing off and then treat it for the water resistance, then we would have, what I would call a gold medal in this battle against COVID-19. It exactly was that. It came off. It was lightweight. It was disposable. It was a level 3 fabric. So instantly, the conversations moved very rapidly with both the provincial government and the federal government that we had a fabric developed. It was tested at Health Canada. It was sent on a Wednesday, tested on a Thursday, approved on a Friday. Federal contract negotiated on a Friday night. The provincial contract finalized on a Monday morning, which would have been the last week of March. We recalled all our employees on April 7th. And we made our first shipment on April 16th. So 9 or 10 days later, we made our first shipment to the provincial government.
That's one thing that this whole crisis really revealed was the hole in the Canadian supply chain, like things that are made in Canada. We're so dependent internationally, globally now. That is the inherent threat, I guess, of globalization, is that you're so immensely dependent on other people in other countries and shipping products in. What did this say to you during this process? Your ability as a company to step up and address this crisis?
Even before the crisis, manufacturing, specifically apparel manufacturing, has been beaten up tremendously since 1988, 1992, the 2 free trade agreements that came in. Most of the manufacturers, other than a few, left the country. There is a couple of branded people left. There's us, Canada Goose, who was in this. There's a few out in British Columbia that are still apparel outerwear manufacturers. But largely speaking, it really exposed us once again to when we let it go too far, governments don't have the ability to switch. And private sector, in this case, I think has been tremendous. The manufacturing sector in this country has been tremendous in this effort. Now, governments had to fund it. Governments had to buy the products that these manufacturers are making. But they would have to
buy them anyway, didn't they?
Well, they would have to buy them anyway, so they have to try to source them in China, and sourcing in China has been an immense problem. We're also importing a tremendous amount of PPE through our supply chains for provincial governments as well across the country, whereas their procurement side needed additional buy support. We had those links, but from the fact of the manufacturing side, like these guys, we sit around the country. I always think strategically, but regionally. And we're ready to go. And what it really demonstrated to government and to maybe just the general Canadian market is that these manufacturers are required. We need a level of manufacturing to support whatever might come at us. Now, for instance, when I think about where we might go with this, like why, Stanfields isn't going to supply all the gowns for the Canadian healthcare market or the Nova Scotia Health Association for that matter. But what we can do is we can position a level of manufacturing, a level of people that is consistently supplying every day, every week, every month. And when we have a pandemic or we have a situation where you have to ramp up, you can ramp up. Because we went from 0 to 200 people training everything in about 10 days. And that would be impossible in Stanfield's former world, but because I was, hell bent on making this happen, we made it happen so that people can make it happen. But just think if we actually had 70 people sewing gowns already, like we could have output day one. And we would be, stockpiling. We would put things into inventory that governments and health authorities would have access to, and it would make it easier to support efforts like what on. I mean, it was a monumental lift for the Canadian government and the various health authorities across the country to put the PPE supply in place to make sure that their frontline workers and the healthcare workers and our friends and cousins and mothers and fathers were safe. Like, you think about that, and we have to be better.
I'm just thinking about what you've been able to do in such a short period of time. Just walk me through. I mean, how many gowns have you produced? How much do you produce a day? You've got 200 people working for you that are going, full time since this started, as opposed to having to be laid off, as opposed to having to make do with a lower income. So, what have you been able to produce?
So we're producing now about 115 to 150,000 a week. That we're shipping to the federal government and the provincial government. The contract on the federal side is 100 a week, and the provincial side is 30,000 a week.
That's a phenomenal volume. You wouldn't think that we would need that many gowns.
Yeah, well, I think there's a bit of two things. One, there was the use inside of the pandemic now, and I think there's a little bit of backfilling to round two of this, replenishing the stockpiles in the various regions across the country to deal with pandemic in the future. I don't think we're done with coronavirus or COVID-19. I'm not sure what we call it now, but the governments need product and desire to have product, and we're going to be making as many gowns as we can here for the next probably we're about 6 to 8 weeks in. We got about 16 weeks to go.
So do you anticipate that you're going to be a part of the Canadian supply chain for this type of product in the future? And will you continue making hospital gowns beyond the immediate crisis situation?
Yeah, I think there's demand there to allow a company like Stanfields, which we call a new entrant, to participate in PPE. I think that, it's a desire of governments federally and provincially to have a manufacturing strategy to support healthcare workers, specifically PPE products. And I know they haven't sorted all the issues out and who it might be and what it might look like, type of thing. But, from my perspective, I think that governments need to position companies regionally to support efforts. So when I think of Stanfields, and I've already put my hand up to the federal government in Minister Bain's office and talked with the Minister Baines himself and said, listen, Stanfields is strategically positioned on the East Coast to support a level of PPE, whether that is continue to make disposable gowns, shifting to reusable gowns, which are a little bit more environmentally friendly on the use side, to positioning mask machines that we can put in our factory to make procedural masks, potentially N95 masks in our factory that can support the East Coast. So when I think of the East Coast, I think of maritime provinces plus Newfoundland. The demand would be quite high. We could position enough people to supply a level of their demand. So what would happen is that we could supply them. And if the supply chain broke down like they did again, well, we could ramp up quickly to put more bodies, less training, higher, get to the higher outputs faster than we even did this time. So I think those are very strategic things that governments need to consider, and they really need to talk to, what I call the action people. And the action people are the ones who actually put up their hand and can go fast and make it happen. Mm-hmm. Not like nothing against the engineers and the future design of what we might need, but in this case, we need a companies and business leaders and people that could put up their hand and actually do it, not right. Put up their hand and say they can do it and then not do it. That was the worst in this situation. So going forward, we have to position a level of manufacturing across the country that can support future issues that arise like this and right. Disrupt supply chains immensely.
Well, I mean, there is an economic reality for CEOs like yourself, business owners. You have staff that you're responsible for. I mean, you can't be expected to sit twiddling your thumbs for the next government order to come in. So there would have to be a level of support or commitment so that you are ready to, to meet that demand going forward. You have to find ways to have revenue coming in so that you can continue operating, so that you can put up your hand.
Yeah, I think that demand is even beyond the healthcare sector. Now you think of dentists, you think of physiotherapists, occupational health workers, um, FedEx workers, people who fix your fridges in your house, your telecommunications people who come in and look at your cable or internet. These people have to wear PPE when they come into your house. So beyond that, at this point in time, demand is still extremely high for gowns and masks in this country as we work through the pandemic. Now, we're going to find a vaccine at some point. It's going to slow down. But for the next 18 months, probably we're in a state of consciousness of, protecting yourself, your family, your household. It comes to business, you got to protect your employees. You got to keep people out of the, like, for instance, we got to keep people out of the factory who shouldn't be in here. Like before the pandemic, we had people wandering around here all the time that were former retirees or suppliers that just kind of come and go, but they're not allowed in here anymore. It's just like it's like our little state of emergency. We have to protect our people. But yeah, we're not going to be solely reliant on governments for contracts. But what governments can do is they can position, they can provide a level of contract, and then it's our responsibility to go fill the remainder of that demand, which we would, because we're a North American supplier of apparel products. So we would just go to market through our normal channels and sell the difference of our capacity, just like we would on a normal product.
So prior to the pandemic, I know a lot of employers were having issues getting employees, and the competition for talent is a very stiff competition out there. Have you found that even more difficult during the last few months?
Um, it was challenging before the pandemic, and surprisingly not. When we went to hire people in our market. So I was always wondering why we couldn't hire sewers. Like we have people that have been producing for us in Ontario for 3 or 4 years because we can't hit all of our demand out of churros. So we have contracted to other Canadian cut and sew people to help us with our branded products. But when the pandemic hit and our story hit the market, I think 2 things happened. One, I think people looked at Stanfields once again differently. We're 164 years old. We've been in this spot in Truro for 138 years. I think people drive by here and go, "Oh, there's Stanfields, whatever. Tom and John are working away and everything's good." They're always going to protect that business and those people in our community. And I think some of my messages was like, the world was going to be different for this business. It would have struggled immensely, and we need to do this now. This is how we can help Canada. This is a way for Truro to help Nova Scotia, to help our country through this pandemic. And I will open our doors to sewers who want to come in and support. These people are putting their lives at risk, and this is our time and what we can do. We're not healthcare workers. I'm not a healthcare worker. I can't put up my hand and say, I'll go to the hospital and help you. But what I can do is put up my hand and say, this business and our people can support you. And I think the people of our community put their hand up as well and said, hey, I think that's awesome. I think Stanfields is a great old company. They work hard. They're a family business. The emotional, interviews that I went through with the press across the country, I think resonated about who we were as a company and how we fit into the Canadian psyche or Canadian culture of who we are as a business and who we are as a brand. But I also think the generation out there today is looking to help. And I think the cause of frontline workers and healthcare workers, supporting them, protecting them, I think just brought people out of the woodwork. For instance, we went out on the weekend. So I said we reopened on April 7th. Well, we went to the market on April 3rd to hire people. We put it out to play. We had 600 people in about 48 hours apply for the positions. We probably had 144 positions that we could fill instantly, which we did. We're net 2 times our workforce pre-pandemic, so we're up around maybe a little north of 400 people now working in this facility, which is a number that we wouldn't have got to maybe back in the late 90s, where we were north of 400 people working in this place. And we have young people, we have students. What I did say to myself when I was doing this, I said, I'm going to pay what we did was $17 an hour. I felt that was a good wage for people. It allowed them to make the choice of staying home or not staying home. There's all those debates about what the government has done post Jon's decision to make that the hourly wage. But if I did make that hourly wage, I would have a competitor in, the stay home versus go to work environment. But largely, a lot of young people came out, a lot of summer students, a lot of university students who are trying to pay their way through college are here. For instance, the average age of the night shift is 29, which is remarkable because the average age of our sewers pre-pandemic was 60. So you think about that shift of, we had a demographic shift in this place as well. We had a complete training shift. These people did not know how to sew, some of them, before they even entered the place. And they were trained for one day and had to go to the line and had to have an output after 5 days of X amount of units per day through their team. So, there's a lot of pressure on them, a lot of pressure on our supervisors, a lot of pressure on the business. But, I think that people are still applying. We're still adding. We probably add 9 or 10 a week that we onboard because some people come and go, and some people, don't show up to work. Like normal situations that employers face, and you don't know what challenges people face at home. So, it is what it is here. We just try to put the asses in the seats to sew the gowns and train them and provide them a really good wage, and hopefully they have a really good positive mindset of Stanfields, and we retain some of them. But the community's response and the company's response will always, again, steadfast in Canadian history like it has.
Well, I think it's very fitting that a company that's in the foundation garment business is actually building a foundation for the rebuilding of the Canadian manufacturing sector and supply chain. So thank you so much for your time and for talking to me today.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Don. I appreciate it.